Hello, everyone, and welcome to Streetwise Live. I'm Cyndi Edwards. Many investors are looking at psychedelics as the next big thing. Today, we are talking to the only public company that is researching psychedelics currently to help repair the brain in the hours after a stroke. Algernon Pharmaceuticals has started a clinical research program using the molecule DMT, aka dimethyltryptamine. Preclinical trials showed that rats treated with DMT recovered motor function quicker and had fewer lesions when compared to a control group that did not receive DMT. Joining us now are Algernon's CEO, Christopher Moreau, and Algernon's DMT stroke research consultant, Professor David Nutt. Hello, you two.
Hi, Cyndi.
Chris, I want to start with you. There have been hundreds of drugs tested for stroke over the years, largely without success. So why do you think the psychedelic drug DMT will be any different?
Well, it's based on the science. The preclinical data looks quite interesting that when brain cells in the laboratory, so in preclinical in vitro experiments, were exposed to not just DMT, but various psychedelics for different periods of time, that exposure created an increased density of complexity in the neuron, these dendritic spines, which connect to synapses. And so the preclinical data looked quite interesting. Then additional studies, this was done by an investigator called Olson, found that a subpsychedelic dose of DMT could also perhaps be effective in treating depression in an animal study. And then you mentioned the rat study of Nardi, where they actually tie off some of the blood to one half of the brain, creating a stroke insult. And then DMT was provided, and at the end of a 30-day period, there was a recovery of motor function, and there was a lessened area of dead cells known as the infarct volume. So it's based on the science. Because we're a public company, actually an analyst called me recently and said, "Why are you looking at this? Hundreds of drugs have failed." And I thought to myself, well, it's because hundreds have failed. That's why we're looking at it. I mean,
exactly.
That makes sense.
It sure does. Okay, Dr. Nutt, can you explain how DMT works in the human brain and how it causes hallucinations?
We can, yes. And it works like other psychedelic drugs like psilocybin and LSD by stimulating a serotonin receptor called the 5-HT2A receptor. And this is very heavily distributed throughout the human brain. And the human brain has more of these receptors than any other species. And so they're very, very important for cellular activity, neuronal activity. And I think the reason DMT and psychedelics will work in stroke or may work in stroke, whereas other treatments haven't, is because up till now, what people have tried to do is find drugs or use drugs which reduce the damage caused by the loss of oxygen, which is what a stroke is. And no one up till now has tried to find drugs to regrow the brain. So this is a conceptually fundamentally different approach. It's about accepting that there's damage to the brain, but seeing if we can accelerate recovery, because we know there is recovery, even in humans, there's some recovery, but if we can make that bigger and stronger and faster through this mechanism, through stimulating these 2A receptors, then it's a very exciting alternative strategy.
Oh my gosh, the prospect of it is so exciting. Now, Chris, when will the first human study be conducted, and what will you be trying to learn?
So in drug development, the first study is called a phase 1 study. It's really a safety and dosage study. And we're planning to conduct that study in October at Hammersmith Medicine Research in the UK, close to where Dr. Nutt is. And what we're trying to establish is the concentration or the dose of DMT. We're trying to keep the dose at what I had mentioned earlier at the sub-hallucinogenic level, because when you've had a stroke, you're going through a psychological disturbance. That's part of it. And you really don't want to be sending folks on a trip that could cause. In fact, there have been a few stroke medications that have ended quickly because they were causing hallucinations. Patients were jumping out of beds, and that's a drama and another insult the brain doesn't need. So we are going to be looking at, in this phase 1 study, dosing patients intravenously. So we bypass the stomach, which can take DMT and sort of minimize it or actually make it so that it can't be metabolized. There's an inhibitor or an oxidase, monoamine oxidase in the stomach, which breaks down DMT. So instead of ingesting it, we're delivering it intravenously. We just have to figure out how much and then for what duration, 15 minutes, 1 hour, 5 hours, what's the maximum tolerated dose. So that will be the first stage. And the second stage, we can start treating people in a phase 2 who have actually had a stroke and see if DMT can help them.
Oh, I'm sure there are so many people listening right now who are so hopeful about this. Now, Dr. Nutt, it's been said that in people's dying moments, they can feel this euphoria, a sense of freedom and release. And sometimes they say they're going toward the light. Now, could that be attributed to the release of DMT in the human brain or another similar molecule? Is that what's happening?
Some people believe that. I mean, let's be clear about it. It's only when you have a near-death experience. You've got to come back and explain that. But it is... Yes, there's no doubt. There are similarities. We published a paper recently working with a group in Belgium who ask about near-death experiences. There is an overlap between a psychedelic experience and a near-death experience, and it probably reflects the way in which the brain is changed by these two events. But we're not trying to do that. Let's just emphasize and repeat what Chris said. We are not using a psychedelic dose. We are using a dose that will facilitate neuronal growth and outgrowth and synaptic formation, but we're not using a psychedelic dose. We're not going to give these people a near-death experience, I promise you. Okay.
Now, Chris, when will you test DMT on people who have actually had a stroke to see if DMT can help them?
So if everything goes to plan, we're planning on Q1 for 2022, and probably the first patients we'll try to treat is patients who are in rehabilitation. So after you've had a stroke, whether it's a ischemic, which is a blockage, or a hemorrhagic, which is a bleed, within 20 to 48 hours, they'll start rehabilitation. And part of that rehabilitation therapy, one modality is called CIMT, constraint induced movement therapy. They will literally tie off one of your arms, the good arm, and sort of force you to be using the arm that may have been affected by the stroke. And so we're working on this with Dr. Nutt as one of our consultants to design that protocol where if you're recovering, you're going through rehab, we'll give you a dose of DMT, and then we'll hope to see that patients that have DMT are either recovering more quickly, they're getting more function back in their limb. The hand is very dexterous. There's fine motor movements. I think the changes will be a little easier for us to see. That will be the first step. Then we'll look at patients that have actually had a stroke or are having one, and how soon can we treat them before they've had a CAT scan, before we find out if it's ischemic or hemorrhagic. Do we have to treat them right away? Does it matter? Or can we treat them in the hours after and still get the same effect? This will be part of our second phase 2 approach. So it's exciting, and I'm very hopeful. I just want to mention we're getting lots of emails from people around the world who ask me, I've had a stroke, a family member's had a stroke, a friend, can we be in the study? Can we find out more? So it's a very, very important area, and we're moving as quickly as we can to see if it can help people.
Now, Dr. Nutt, you've done a lot of work trying to educate and change public policy on the use of drugs like DMT. Do you think the fear of psychedelic drugs like DMT or other controlled substances will put limits on its use, or will doctors embrace it regardless?
No, I think your first point is likely. There's been so much misinformation about these drugs going back to the 60s, their association with the hippies and the anti-Vietnam War movement. It's 50 years of misinformation we've got to overturn. And the best way of overturning it is through good evidence. Once we start to provide data, I think the doctors will be enthusiastic. I mean, particularly stroke doctors, because stroke doctors truly, it's one of the most barren areas of drug development in the whole of medicine. So I think if we show something, the stroke doctors will come on board quickly. And also the ongoing work in psychiatric illness will also help convince people that these drugs have utility. So I think we're on the cusp of a revolution, but it's still a lot of education to do, and potentially the biggest education will actually be in politicians, because in the end they will have to change the law and the regulations to make it possible for people to use these medicines.
And I know you don't want to give people false hope out there, Dr. Nutt, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how hopeful are you about the possibilities with DMT and helping stroke victims?
I'm saying I'm currently at a 3, but I'm hoping once we've shown we can do it safely and start the trials with patients next year, then I'm hoping I'll move up to a 5 or a 6. But as Chris said, this is 99% of all trials in stroke have failed. So we must be realistic, but this is novel. This is a different way. This is regrowing the brain. This is not just stopping the brain dying, and that's why it's fundamental. And it's really interesting and theoretically very fascinating.
It's fascinating.
And we have the animal models allow us to ask very important questions about the timing and the duration. And Algernon are now already starting up these studies so that we will have much better clarity as to what the dosing should be and the timing of the treatment.
Okay, we're just about out of time, but Chris, any last word for investors who are out there watching right now?
I think this DMT and stroke is one of our research programs. Algernon is a drug repurposing program. We're trying to find the next blockbuster drug from compounds that have either been pre-approved. In this case, DMT has never been approved, but it has been used really for other purposes. We're looking at repurposing DMT, and as Dr. Nutt said, it's all about the science. It's been the data from the animals right now makes us hopeful. There's a difference when you go into man, but we're advancing it. We're going to do it with capital efficiency and speed, and with quality, good research. Hopefully, that will make differences in people's lives. That's what we're trying to do.
Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen, both very much for joining us today. Very informative.
Thanks, Cyndi.
Thank you, Cyndi.
And thanks to everyone at home who tuned in as well. Again, the company name is Algernon Pharmaceuticals. And to get the latest updates on a variety of public companies, please subscribe to Streetwise Live and give us a thumbs up. Have a great day, everyone. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.